So, Older Gods is a story of a young man called Chris Rivers who ventures into the depths of Wales in order to investigate the suspected suicide of his friend Billy. And as the details emerge and as these mysterious clues are found, it's clear that not everything is as it seems, and there's a much darker reality at play. Yeah, so Chris Rivers is a guy from Denver, and he's sort of gone headfirst into adulthood, and he's got a job, he's got a wife, and he's left childhood behind him, and along with that he's left behind a friend of his, Billy, who as a child he was sort of like really close with, and as Chris sort of matured, Billy seemed to stay in this phase of, fantasy, of stories, of strange mysteries that he was really obsessed with, and sort of, I guess you could think of it as like a conspiracy theorist, and everyone would distance themselves from Billy, and Chris, you could say, is the last person to have done that. He tried to stay close with him, but ultimately he wanted to move on with his life, and he kind of always carried that guilt around with him. So when he finds out that Billy's been found dead and it's from a suspected suicide, Chris has an inkling that it's not as simple as that, and all these things Billy was talking about, these stories of whatever it is, the cults or the darkness he was talking about, Chris feels like there's more to it than just a suicide. And I think he's motivated by guilt. I think he's kind of guilt-ridden, and when he hears of the death of Billy, he's grief-stricken, and he feels like, no one else is going to do this for Billy. It's up to him to... He owes it to Billy to sort of investigate and dig to the truth. At the top of the film, we meet Chris, and he's wearing a tie, and he's a teacher, and he's wearing a jumper, and he looks a little bit preppy. And if you fast forward all the way to the end of the film, he's like got muck on his face, he's bloody, he's like sort of wanting to get into the fight and kill, and to try and track that whole emotional journey for the character was like huge. Especially over the length of a feature film, which was going to be a really exciting challenge. So I guess the challenge was to make sure that the journey felt coherent, and that, the audience could track the journey with Chris and to go along that journey with him and understand the choices he makes, understand how he sort of departs from his morals at times, and to make sure the root of it all was this idea of guilt and this idea of he owes this to his friend. Yeah, it was, I remember David sort of sending me a draft of the script, and I thought, wow, this would be really cool to do, even to do a small part of it, the scope of the story and the journey that the characters go on. And then to be offered the role, I was over the moon and a little bit sort of apprehensive, because we'd worked previously on a short film together, and to take it to a feature-length story and to make sure I was able to map the journey of the character, and for the audience to be able to trust me that I was making the right decisions, that was sort of a big part of it. But I was extremely excited, and really excited to work with David again and work with the crew, and to go off to Wales and do it all together. Yeah, there's definitely a couple of scenes which I was really excited to do, just because I felt like it was gonna be challenging, or it was gonna be really intense, and I was gonna have to bring a lot of energy. But the strange thing is, there was one scene that I was looking forward to the most, was the scene when I reunite with Billy, and that's a bit of a spoiler. But because most of the film I'm like by myself, and I'm acting like either it's on the phone or I'm looking through things, and it's like kind of very solitary. But I knew there was a scene when I was going to be with Billy, and I was really kind of looking forward to being with another actor and bouncing off the other actor. And the nature of the scene is kind of nice. It's got a good sensibility to it, and I was looking forward to that. And that kind of ties in a little bit with the story itself, because the whole film I'm looking for traces of Billy, and then to also be looking forward to meeting him and working with him and doing the scene with him, is sort of matched up. I was really looking forward to all that, to be honest. I guess like making sure it made sense how I got there, and like acting on the same impulses that I was acting on at the beginning of the film, but just everything sort of dialed up a little bit. What was challenging? There was like maybe some emotional stuff, which I knew I really wanted to get right, but I also knew it was really important for the story that the emotions were laid down, and it was convincing but sort of really heartfelt, so that you could understand the motivation later on in the film, and it all lined up. Because without that emotion at the beginning, everything would just seem kind of heightened for no reason. So I guess there was one in particular scene which was talking on the phone by the window to Billy's mum, and it was I love the way the scene was written. I was really like excited to get to the scene, but ultimately I knew we had to really find something with the scene. We had to find the emotion and the right sensibility, and we got through a couple of takes, and I just knew there was more in the tank. We did the wide, we got a little bit closer, and it got to the point where you could feel everyone was wanting to move on. But David's always said, if you ever want another take, ask for it and I will give it to you. And I just thought, okay, maybe this is the time when I'm going to ask for that extra take. And so we did like one final setup, which was just a little bit closer. And I remember David was reading off camera, and the stars aligned, and David, he started reading in his mother's voice, which sounds absurd really, but there's something about the way David was reading the lines off camera. It just really got into my heart, and suddenly the scene was alive, and it was everything I wanted it to be, and there was the emotion, and there was like the truth, and it was so kind of like, it was just bleeding out of me. And I've got to credit David for being right there for me, sticking with me, and tapping into his motherly nature. And it was, I hope there's some sort of like behind the scenes of that, or just like his voice being heard, because that was like the key to unlocking that scene. Time pressure was a huge thing we all had to like navigate, especially because it was like COVID, and we felt it would be a little bit more difficult to all come together again and to do any pickups or anything like that. But going in, knowing that we had 7 days to shoot a feature-length 90-page script, part of my preparation was to be ready at any time to do any scene and be totally confident to do that. Because I knew, if we were ahead of schedule, we'd be cramming scenes into that first, second day. And if we were behind schedule, then that would only mean at the end of the shoot, we'd be picking up the pace and going through it a little bit faster. So for me, I had to be ready to do any scene at any moment, whether it was the emotional scenes or the physical scenes. And so a big part of that was making sure I mapped the journey of the character in my head, and I knew at what point he was, what he was feeling and what the circumstances were, and at what point on the arc the scene was. And I think the weird thing is that by doing all that preparation, I felt really comfortable, and I could sort of have an open dialogue about what I was feeling and what we could do when we were talking about. Each morning we'd have these awesome little meetings, and we'd all make a cup of tea and go sit in a park, like sort of picnic table, and we'd talk about what we were doing that day. And I felt, because I was fully prepared, I could say I'm really happy to do this. Let's go ahead and do this. Let's try and get this scene in there so we don't have to come back and do it another time. So I guess the preparation was being ready to do any scene at any moment and feeling confident, and had it all mapped out in my brain so that everyone else's job could be a little bit easier. I remember, so when I first read the script and, the description of the location, I thought, this would be really cool, but that's going to be really difficult to find. And then I remember David sent me some pictures from the location recce, and David said something like, I think we found the location. And I looked at it and I thought, that is definitely the location. And And when we eventually got there and, you know, you're seeing some of the drone footage, you think, wow, this is incredible. What a place to set a story. And so, yeah, just from like the story side of it, it was an awesome environment to set this, like this sort of horror type tale. But then from a practical point of view, it was like, you know, this crew and the actors that came in, you know, we were all stuck in this place. And basically we had nothing else to do other than make the film. So we just made the film, you know what I mean? Like, I think like when you think about wanting to make a film, you just think, I just want to get in there. I want to immerse myself and I want to just like live and breathe the film. And when you try and do that, usually there's like tons of distractions and like, you know, you spend an hour each day trying to figure out where to park everyone's car. But the great thing about shooting in Wales and in this little cabin was there was nothing else to do but make the film. You know, we were living and breathing it, and like we'd all worked together previously, and we all pulled together, and it was so ambitious. But because of who everyone was and the fact that everyone was so experienced and we were all there to do it, it sort of like it became almost like a summer camp doing it. It was great. No signal. We had to all march up to this massive hill to get signal, and yeah, no, I think, you know, it was an awesome experience to be a part of. And when you sort of fantasize about the ideal filming situation, I think this is exactly it, where you just go in and you are totally immersed in it, and everyone is immersed in it. The crew, everyone knows what's going on, and there's nothing else to do but make a film. It was definitely a huge step up for me to be trusted to take on this character and to take the audience with me on this journey through the film. But like, I think the excitement to do it sort of overpowered all the other feelings, and to be handed a character that goes on such an extreme journey was like, you know, I saw it as just this incredible opportunity to really dive in deep and to show my sensibility in the acting and also the physical nature of it, and to try and show this journey from, you know, like I said, this guy who starts wearing a tie and by the end is shirtless and bloody, and like, how do you actually map that journey? And that was like this really, really exciting challenge. But I think, you know, the fact that David was leading the charge, and as a writer-director, I could pick his brains about the story, and we could have proper discussions about the script and how the story plays out, and how, you know, the character goes from point A to point B, like what is the actual process of that. That was really invaluable, really, because I think taking on a project of this scale but not having the access to the writer in the way that I did, because David's the writer-director, that allowed me to really sort of get into the nitty-gritty of the character and how this was going to play out across 90 minutes. I think fans are going to get more than they hoped for. You know, this is like a Lovecraftian descent into madness and retribution, and it's got horror, it's got danger, it's got darkness, but it's also got this kind of like drama element to it, and I think that's really the beating heart of it, and that opens the film up to, I think it's going to open the film up to like a wider audience. You know, it's, connecting to the character and the journey of the character, but also getting the entertainment factor and getting the little jump scares and stuff like that. I think it's going to be really interesting to see who's going to engage with this film, because I feel like there's a lot of different ways you could interpret the story. You know, you know, I think it's a story about friendship, and it's a story about guilt, and a story about, you know, holding on to the things that were once important to you, and not sort of, as you get lost in adulthood, you know, thinking about what you're leaving behind. You know. David and I worked first on a short film called Afterlife. And I think from that experience, it was clear that, the guy cared a lot about the story. He was a writer-director. He knew exactly what he wanted to do, but he was also aware that, it was always going to be a team effort. And, as the actor of the ensemble, I always felt that David was giving me the time, giving me the insight into what was going on. And ultimately, and most importantly, I always felt like David trusted me. And especially to then take on the role in the feature film, which was also David's directorial debut. So this is a big moment for David as well. I always felt he was backing me. And, one thing was that he would always say, you can always have another take. If you want another take, absolutely tell me and we're going to do it. Whatever's going on, no matter how rushed we are, no matter how behind schedule we are, if you want another take, have it, because ultimately that's what's going to be seen on the big screen. And that just gave me this kind of this belief in myself, the confidence, and on a few occasions I definitely took advantage of that, and I was comfortable to do that. I think, the worst situation for a young actor to be given like a big role in a film would be to feel totally under pressure, to feel like everyone was wanting you to do it in the first or second take, and if you go to the third take, it's an absolute nightmare, and the crew start huffing and puffing. And that is exactly the opposite of what happened, and I couldn't be more grateful for an experience for my first leading feature role to be exactly what it is. David was sleeping on the couch downstairs, and everyone else was in beds. I think that speaks volumes. I go back to this example when there was a scene when I'm talking to Billy's phone. There was a scene when I'm talking to Billy's mum on the phone, and it's at the top of the film, and it's sort of laying the foundation of the emotions and how Chris is really feeling about the situation. And I knew there was an emotional level we had to get to. And we did the take, we did 2, 3, 4 takes, and I just wasn't quite getting there. And I really wanted to get to a certain place with the scene. And so I asked for another take. And David was reading the scene with me, and something changed in this last take. And David started reading it in this different way. And he was really giving everything to me off camera. And he was feeding me the lines, and he was taking on, and afterwards he told us he was taking on the persona of his own mother. And it sounds like the weirdest thing, but he was so there for me, and he was willing me on in the scene, and he was even digging into his own sort of feelings and relationships in order to give me what I needed. And ultimately, that last take was the breakthrough, and we really got where we wanted to get to. And I don't know if many directors would really do that. They probably get someone else to read the lines and just put all the demand on the actor. But I always felt David was right there with me. And there's a couple of occasions when we were all sat around the picnic table having lunch, and I remember Yayan being there. Yayan is who plays Billy, and we were just talking about filmmaking and talking about making a first feature film and the industry. And I remember David giving this incredible speech out of nowhere about how you just have to get on with it. You just have to go and do it. And, referencing a South by Southwest speech about the cavalry isn't coming. And in that moment, I could just imagine David standing up at South by Southwest and giving his own speech to inspire everyone. And I just felt so inspired in that moment and moving forwards. And for the first feature film leading role was just an incredible experience, and I'm grateful that it was David at the helm. There seems to be this idea that, to be honest, there's a mystery around what a director is and what is a director's function on a film set. Ultimately, when you see a film, you sort of have this idea that the director was right there and it's the director's vision. But the reality is it's everyone's effort coming together. And the director has to be this sort of lens for everyone's attention, to focus it to achieve a certain aim. And as a young actor, I haven't done like so many projects, but I've done small parts in bigger productions. And the director is sort of a miss. You don't really know where the director is. You don't really hear the director's voice. You hear a lot from the first AD. You're right next to the DOP, and you sort of feel like any notes or any sort of that looks, you're looking straight to the DOP to see, was it good? As soon as they call cut, the first thing I'm looking at is the DOP to see what their reaction is. And I'm trying to gauge my performance and how it's going based on the DOP. But really what should be happening is that the director should be the one right there, your confidant in the whole experience. And I definitely felt that with David. David had a little monitor, which he was so not fussed about that I think half the time it didn't even have a battery in it, and it was just hanging around his neck. And after every take, my eyes would always just go to David, and David always would be there. And it sounds like a small thing, but that's really important to make sure you have someone to gauge how things are going. So David was always right by the camera, always right there as like sort of the reassurance and the support. Another thing was like David was always very honest and very frank with me, and which I'm grateful for. Sometimes if it wasn't working, it just wasn't working, and David was able to say, we're going to do it again, and we need a little bit more, or we need to tone it down, or for example, like the scene with Yayan when Chris reunites with Billy, we had to spend a little bit of time getting there and figuring out what that dynamic is, and the blocking and rehearsing it through and making sure it was just sort of like the tone of it was right. And that even extends to reshooting a whole scene because David just wasn't happy. And I think there were a couple of elements of it that, that hadn't worked quite as David had thought. And he's honest enough to say, it's not working, we're going to have to come back and shoot that again. So I think it all falls into this idea of trusting someone's judgment and just going along with it because you trust that they know what they're doing. So working with Wagyu Films was a pretty unique experience really, because given it was such a tight schedule and such a small crew, it meant that everyone was doing more than just pulling their own weight. It was evident that everyone was doing multiple jobs. And that includes David as the director. Not only was he directing, but he was playing a key role in like setting up the shots, thinking about the lighting, thinking about the production design. You could see him editing in his head as we were shooting. He was scheduling. He was basically his own first AD as well. And who knows in 10 years' time when David's on a huge set and Wagyu Films have a 10-picture deal with Netflix, things might change and they might start, distributing the workload. But David had an incredible ability to multitask, but not put any sort of stress on anyone else. It was taken as a given that there was going to be a multitasking element to it.
Chris, thank you for following the breadcrumbs. I knew you'd be the one to find them. Now, listen to my voice. My breathing is steady. I sound fully conscious. I am not what you all think I am. If you look through our findings, you'll see that we'd found sites, out-of-the-way places to perform their depravities. We looked wherever there were reports of overindulgent murders, anything ritualistic. And we found lots of them. We realized we'd walked into their trap. They were tracking us.
Are you burdened with religion, Mr. Duffy? Do you know why he doesn't answer our prayers? He's scared, terrified, of waking something far older than him. He knows that by helping us, it would notice him. You see, your God is a coward. It answers me when I call. It listens. It tells me when it wakes, I will be rewarded for my devotion. And when it makes this world drown, I won't offer my hand to save any of you.